What if everything we have come to accept about the natural formation of our universe is merely a carefully crafted illusion, hiding a far more interesting mystery, hidden deeply in Sumerian records? It's an easy idea to dismiss, at least it is at first, because what many of us probably don't know is that out of the thousands of written texts that have been slowly uncovered from the sandy remnants of ancient Mesopotamia, only a tiny fraction, just around 10%, have ever been translated and catalogued. What other mysteries may lie waiting within those unread tablets of hard-baked clay? Because the small handful of records we can read reveal an origin story of breathtaking scale. Ages before the Babylonians wrote down the legendary triumphs of the Enuma Elish, the ancient scribes of Sumer had already charted a similar origin story that started long before the first trace of structural order. Tonight, we allow our minds to drift past the familiar geometry of distant, twinkling lights suspended in the night sky, to explore the lesser-known history of the Anunnaki gods and the events that finally allowed mortal life to take its very first breath. These incredible creation myths offer a small glimpse into a forgotten time hidden carefully within the infinite folds of our collective history. And it should not be overlooked, because this was no mere small feat of rebellion. It was the biggest shift our young Earth had ever witnessed. It cannot be a simple mistake that some of the oldest civilizations of mankind left behind dedicated records of this polarizing cosmic war, one that permanently shifted the boundaries of the world as they knew it. Here, ancient clay tablets detail a multi-fronted battle between the rising Anunnaki gods and their far older primordial ancestors. Immense giants whose immortal hold over the vast secrets of our universe had reigned supreme for countless millennia before the dawn of the first light, before the first spark of life walked upon muddy plains, and long, long before the first kings were said to have descended from the heavens to guide the primeval cities of antiquity. Join us as we embark on the second part of our journey to reveal how the seized gods of Mesopotamian lore were forcibly overthrown to make way for a bountiful earthly paradise, one which was capable of nurturing the countless species of life yet to sip from the sweet fresh waters bubbling up from the Apsu, gaze into the star-speckled sky, or walk upon the muddy banks of ancient Sumerian plains. Through the slowly recovered remnants of mysterious cuneiform records, we trace the defeat of Enmesharra alongside his 7 demonic sons, as well as the glorious battle of Tiamat and Quingu, to understand how this terrifying reign of lost titans finally lost control. Those original architects of creation fiercely guarded the sacred celestial blueprints, known to early priests as the Holy May, and exclusively possessed the glowing Tablet of Destinies, keeping their infinite knowledge away from the curious eyes of their growingly ambitious descendants. The sheer stakes of possessing such universe-altering power cannot be understated. It is said that every physical law of nature depended entirely upon whoever held those powerful earthen ledgers, which served both as the intrinsic knowledge of the very ether itself, as well as the eternal energy which drives it to manifest. And the coming war over such vast wisdom would change the very face of the earth forever. Before we continue, I'd love to know where and when this quiet journey has found you. Leave a comment below with your city and the hour where you are right now. There is something quietly comforting about realizing that countless listeners, scattered across distant lands and different time zones, are all settling into the same quiet journey through the forgotten echoes of human history. Also, if these late-night journeys into the ancient world bring you rest or even help you drift off, consider subscribing. It helps this quiet community grow and allows us to keep bringing you more of these peaceful stories to share. For uninterrupted sleep and longer versions, you can also join the Legends of the Dawn membership. Now, let the noise of the present fade. Tonight, we journey back thousands of years to continue our story, when Apsu lay permanently entranced in his eternal slumber. The invisible shockwaves of this divine insurrection by the water god Enki surged rapidly across the quiet terrestrial plains of our earth. The raw subterranean malice of the deep was about to clash violently against the bright and purifying winds of the shining new pantheon. Deafening roars of a divine conflict building on the horizon of those turbulent salty seas, and within the deepest depths of the earth itself. Our exploration begins by peering deeply into the dark waters of that endless primordial ocean, where a fierce goddess named Tiamat had retreated into those lightless depths to mourn the sudden loss of her husband. She rested quietly within a hidden chasm as she wept bitterly. But her reigning companions would not allow her despair to remain a mere peaceful act of grieving. They resented their descendants for daring to overthrow such a powerful entity of their own hierarchy, and lamented to Tiamat how their relentless noise was just as tiresome to them as it had been for her partner, who had now been silenced forever. Complaints that rang all too true in Tiamat's hollowed eyes, reflected perfectly in every tear which dispersed silently into her watery domain. They convinced her to devise an inescapable retribution against their rebellious descendants, leading her to take on a new and much darker form. This monstrous aura did not define her entire character. It was a direct result of the loss of her beloved partner. Long before the tragic overthrow of Apsu occurred, she possessed a boundless maternal nature that was entirely passive, serving as the very embodiment of the salty seas themselves. The earliest scribes portrayed her as the literal raw matter of primeval creation, providing a gentle, nurturing suspension for all organic life that was patiently waiting to bloom. But this shocking betrayal by the younger deities had fundamentally altered her soul. Her profound sorrow twisted rapidly into an unquenchable thirst for vengeance, encouraged by the other titans who sympathized with her rage. The silent depths of her aquatic kingdom began to echo with a terrifying new resonance, as her once passive waters boiled over with an unimaginable sorrow that shook the very foundation of our entire world. Heaving currents stirred aggressively to reshape her boundless essence into a formidable weapon. She was no longer just a serene ocean, but a colossal force of nature preparing to strike a devastating blow. She took on the morphing form of a massive dragon, possessing vast-scaled wings which could blacken the entire sky, and a belly which could expand to swallow the heavens whole. Her massive form was shrouded in thick shadows which seemed to morph and shift as though alive with the venomous intent which now poisoned her very veins. Some say her shifting form seemed unable to decide between her more tangible draconian form and the shadows of a raging tempest filled with darkly swirling waters. The sheer magnitude of her unstable silhouette painted a terrifying picture against the murky oceanic floor. Thick scales of impenetrable armor began to slowly encrust her swirling body. Venomous fangs grew sharply within a cavernous maw that was eager to tear apart the carefully constructed foundations of our earthly garden. A massive tempest was preparing to rise from those salty depths to permanently shatter the shining shrines of the young Anunnaki gods. Dark storms of maternal wrath gathered heavily along the distant horizon of that endless outer sea. But her strategy was not yet complete, for to fight such an expansive and bright new generation, she would need the help of creatures just as fierce as her opponents. From the darkly churning depths of her salt waters, Tiamat gave birth to 11 horrifying species of primordial monsters. And this is where it gets even more interesting. Because ancient clay tablets don't just detail the creation of a vast army of fierce warriors with shiny weapons. They describe these terrifying creations as a twisting horde of venomous dragons, multi-headed hydra-like serpents, hairy beasts, fierce demons, and twisted scorpion hybrids. They stood as the physical manifestations of the oceanic friction churning endlessly within those chaotic depths, possessing a heart of pure malice that was eager to lend aid. Their shifting silhouettes carried a raw, destructive energy that promised absolute ruin for any opposing forces. Razor-sharp fangs dripped with a toxic poison in anticipation of a brewing war for celestial dominance. Even still, Tiamat did not intend to wage this monumental cosmic war with her army alone. Along with her new army, she rallied the remaining generation of displaced primordial deities to stand firmly by her side. These older gods were absolutely furious at the arrogant behavior displayed by the Anunnaki gods, wishing to restore their own ancient supremacy. Such a massive uprising completely polarized our early universe, splitting the immortal hierarchy into two incompatible factions preparing for battle. To lead this terrifying new army into combat, a towering figure known as Quingu was selected. The primeval sea goddess elevated this arrogant prince of deep water to become her new consort and supreme commander. He served as a fiercely loyal general who was suddenly raised far beyond his original station. Tiamat placed her absolute trust in his abilities. He proudly accepted his heavy burden to lead her army of monsters, projecting a terrifying authority that commanded total submission from his troops lurking in the abyss. Then came a moment of monumental cosmic significance. She pressed the radiant tablet of destinies directly onto his broad chest to legitimize his command, solidifying his full executive control over all reality itself. This magnificent artifact functioned very differently from those sacred blueprints known as Holy May. While those earlier designs held pure instructions for establishing civilization, they did not directly dictate destiny. Rather, it held the esoteric magic capable of overriding the fundamental laws governing our universe, reshaping the every fabric of existence. Quingu wore it proudly as an impenetrable breastplate, radiating a corrupting aura of stolen authority and pure power. He used its blinding light to organize his serpentine forces into an unstoppable wave. Armed with such universe-altering power, this newly appointed general prepared his aquatic vanguard for an impending catastrophic assault. Yet these churning waters were not the only realm reaching its tipping point. A separate insurrection was gathering strength upon the dry terrestrial plains of the West to similarly challenge those shining heavens. That same shockwave of divine displacement had successfully fueled a growing resentment within another ancient lord. The Anunnaki found themselves surrounded from all directions by displaced generations of their heritage, creating a friction that would soon set off a massive revolution, engulfing every single layer of the early cosmos. The sudden displacement of power had subtly poisoned Enmesharra's mind, his fury growing with each passing minute. He was a towering entity who controlled the fundamental laws of the universe. In his earliest days, he rested deep within the packed soil, holding immense authority upon the cosmic mountain, known to early priests as Duel. But his once everlasting patience was eroding rapidly. Enmesharra had now witnessed these descendants' growing desire to overthrow the established primordial order, which had reigned supreme long before these younger gods were ever even thought of. His own bitter hatred toward this shining new pantheon multiplied just as endlessly as the Anunnaki gods themselves, as he watched their aggressive earthly expansion, leading him to tighten his formidable grip upon those sacred celestial blueprints of creation, known to ancient priests as the Holy May. He would formulate his own strategy to regain full control of the universe, while the dragon goddess and her monstrous army lurked in the stormy seas to the east, gathering strength. And while these flawless instructions for civilization remained tightly locked away from any envious eyes, the towering Titan surrounded himself with his 7 terrifying sons, princes of darkness, known as the 7 demons of Mesopotamian lore. They would help him prepare for an inevitable clash of generations, waiting patiently for their moment to strike. These fearsome dark entities hungered for an opportunity to defend his absolute sovereignty over our earth, waiting eagerly for their father's final command to wage a brutal war. Their volatile energy swelled dangerously as an invisible tension pushed our entire universe closer toward the brink of annihilation. The peaceful stasis of our early Earth was about to be permanently shattered by deafening roars of impending divine conflict. That deafening clamor of progress had successfully awakened a sleeping malice that would soon consume the entire world. Enmesharra finally called upon his 7 terrifying sons to unleash the power of their tempests. Together, this Titan and his demonic princes launched a massive assault, striking against the luminous shrines of the skies. This horde of shadowy demons ravaged the green plains, tearing through quiet settlements with unrelenting ferocity. Their chaotic forms blotted out the pale moonlight entirely, plunging the world back into the absolute darkness from which it was formed. Thick dust storms whipped violently across flat mud brick pathways. What structured geometry had been constructed within those early sanctuaries of the young gods soon began to crumble under such immense pressure. Though later traditions would often attribute their roles to the volatile war god, the earliest accounts of this catastrophic event reveal that 2 different champions were forced to wage a massive counterattack. Amongst all this chaos, the mighty air god Enlil stood bravely alongside his warrior son Ninurta as they prepared to defend their shining palaces. These 2 luminous deities descended rapidly, meeting the advancing swarm of shadowy princes with blinding flares of sheer solar energy. Deafening thunder echoed endlessly across the deep valleys below as these opposing forces finally collided. Tempest winds battered heavily against impenetrable rock. They swirled like massive tornadoes of pure malice across our flat delta. Ancient riverbeds boiled under an intense heat radiating from their phantom shapes, but Ninurta wielded fierce atmospheric storms to push back against the creeping tide. He fought with unmatched bravery to protect those fragile boundaries of existence, while Enlil bellowed commands from a high vantage point to coordinate their divine defense. His booming voice carried a purifying clarity that shattered thick illusions woven by the old titans. A staggering display of celestial power washed over dry dirt, while divine geometry pierced through thick clouds of swirling dust. Searing heat from cosmic fires baked muddy riverbanks and turned them into hardened crusts of stone. Ninurta pressed his relentless attack forward. His radiant armor gleamed brightly against an oppressive gloom covering our ancient sky, but the towering Titan refused to yield his ancient sovereignty quietly. He drew upon a boundless reservoir of dark magic buried deep within our planetary crust. His shadowy fingers reached upward as he attempted to tear down those shimmering stars from their seemingly fixed orbits, leading Enlil to direct his brave son to strike, aiming at the very heart of his cosmic mountain. Ninurta answered this call by summoning a blinding tempest of righteous lightning. He hurled his glowing weapons downward in a brilliant flash of solar energy which temporarily blinded those dark shadows. Enmesharra watched his shadowy dominion slowly buckle under the relentless barrage. His bitter pride swelled and he prepared to unleash a devastating wave of subterranean magic. Our Earth itself shuddered under such immense weight of colliding errors, for every physical law of nature depended entirely upon whoever emerged victorious from this brutal siege. Those sacred blueprints contained within the holy May hung precariously in a balance. The Anunnakis' simple desire for expansion now morphed into a dire necessity to obtain the power capable of securing their continued existence. A heavy curtain of absolute silence briefly fell over those ravaged plains. It was a terrifying pause that preceded an ultimate clash of immortals. This breathless hush wasn't just a temporary break in the story, but a heavy, meaningful moment where the entire future of existence waited to be decided. It was an incredible cosmic crossroad, a necessary pivot between a time of endless, unformed sleep and the organized reality we now reside in. When we look back on this defining moment in our past, we can see how the entire expanse of the sky and earth hung in a delicate balance just before everything changed. This particular moment is so fascinating because it shows us that the greatest shifts in our collective memory often begin in absolute stillness. The clay records invite us to ponder how the deep foundations of nature had to be dismantled so that a protective canopy could safely unfold overhead. In that vast, expectant space, everything was catching its breath, easing into the definitive alignment that would forever reshape our sleeping Earth. Both sides gathered their remaining strength for a monumental confrontation, because while these atmospheric gods battered at the terrestrial titan, an equally horrifying threat was quickly approaching from those salty depths to the east. Our fragile universe was completely engulfed and trapped in a blinding maelstrom of colliding forces. An invisible tether of mutual resentment bound these two massive insurrections together in a state of pure chaos. The Anunnaki pantheon found themselves stretched impossibly thin across dual battlefields. They battled Enmesharra and his demons, all while anxiously monitoring the brewing storm overtaking the salty seas. An apocalyptic duel between ocean waters and open skies waited patiently on the distant horizon. Just imagine the sheer pressure of that moment. This wasn't just a simple struggle for territory, but a massive breaking point where the young gods became entirely surrounded by their own ancient ancestry. As we follow this thread from the beginning of all creation to the sweeping wars of later years, we can clearly see that the conflict on land was only the beginning of a much larger cosmic crisis. It is so fascinating to look back at these clay records and see how the ancient priests framed this ultimate test of the heavens. Because the deepest danger wasn't just the battle raging on land, but the unpredictable, rising tide of the great abyss itself. Everything the younger generation had worked to build was suddenly pushed to the absolute edge, right as the endless waters began to shift. Paralyzing terror would quickly grip these younger deities as Tiamat finally advanced. A crushing weight of impending doom settled heavily over luminous shrines of our sky. Our ancient cosmos was about to be tested beyond any measurable limits of mortal comprehension. Tiamat brought forth her venomous army of monsters to wash away every shining trace of divine progress. Ancient clay tablets reveal that the great Skyfather An did at first attempt to halt her devastating march. He was quickly followed by a clever water god named Ea, otherwise known as Enki, who sought to pacify her swirling tides. This well-meaning titan of the upper atmospheres and younger water god approached the roaring sea matriarch with hopes of preserving a fragile peace. They stepped cautiously toward the endless outer ocean that boiled with pure chaotic malice, yet they found themselves completely overwhelmed by her unforgiving presence. Both deities turned back toward their high sanctuaries in an absolute defeat. Their profound celestial logic simply could not penetrate the thick fog surrounding her twisted hybrid creations. A heavy atmosphere of pure despair settled slowly over luminous halls of the heavens. Their brilliant organizing magic seemed entirely powerless against such raw chaos rising from the abyss. Tiamat's monstrous forces promised to wipe out everything in their path and permanently extinguish the comforting silver light of countless distant stars with their shadowy essence. A terrified celestial assembly retreated into their deepest chambers to await an inevitable ruin, as massive salt waves crashed aggressively against their fragile borders. A paralyzing cold drifted through those towering mud-brick temples. It seemed that a beautifully ordered world was destined to dissolve back into a silent, lightless void. But just as absolute darkness prepared to swallow the heavens, another brilliant Anunnaki hero boldly stepped forward. Scribes recorded his name as Marduk, the courageous son of the wise water deity Enki. He refused to cower in the shadows while his vibrant world was completely unmade. This young hero possessed a unique mastery over those most volatile atmospheric winds and the esoteric magic of the deep freshwater oceans directly from his ancient father. Marduk recognized that such an apocalyptic threat required a champion of unparalleled power. He walked proudly into the center of the fearful divine assembly to present a staggering cosmic demand. He requested that older gods grant him absolute kingship over our entire universe. That was his required price for acting as their final defense against the sea. A desperate pantheon quickly agreed to surrender their highest celestial crowns to this brave savior. They transferred their immense collective power into his capable hands to forge an ultimate weapon of deliverance. Older deities rejoiced as this young champion accepted his heavy burden to protect their vulnerable earthly garden. With his supreme destiny officially sealed, the brilliant champion began his careful preparations for a magnificent duel. Marduk did not rely upon standard earthly bronze to fight an ocean of pure chaotic malice. He chose instead to arm himself with the very raw and untamed forces belonging to the upper atmosphere. This radiant god crafted a magnificent bow from those swirling tempests of a darkening sky. He grasped roaring gales to fashion arrows of blinding fire, its intense solar energy filling his very body. It radiated outward to pierce the thick fog rolling off those angry seas. He wrapped his immortal form in a protective armor woven from crackling lightning and deafening thunder. This young king then mounted a terrifying storm chariot to prepare for his devastating descent. 4 massive celestial beasts were harnessed tightly to this roaring divine carriage. They stomped their heavy hooves against the starry vault with an insatiable hunger for battle. His brilliant illumination painted a breathtaking silhouette against the murky horizon of those eastern waters. Marduk stood ready to ride directly into the creeping darkness that threatened to consume our fragile earth. Our entire cosmos held its breath as this single savior prepared to meet an impossible battalion. Of course, the dragon goddess did not wait passively for this radiant challenger to arrive. She gathered her poisonous legion, her elevated general Quingu standing ready at her side. Meanwhile, the sprawling landscape to the west still groaned under the heavy weight of dark shadows ravaging those mud-brick cities. The younger gods would need to gather every last enduring ounce of brilliant energy to shatter those subterranean kingdoms. The inevitable defeat of Enmesharra waited patiently, hovering just above the arid land. Fierce atmospheric deities had launched a devastating counterattack against that shadowy terrestrial siege. They directed their purifying winds towards the cosmic mountain known to early priests as Duku. This elevated earthen peak served as a heavily fortified stronghold for the ancient underworld king. Nevertheless, Anunnaki warriors were eventually able to overwhelm the defenses surrounding this primeval fortress with blinding flashes of solar light. Enmesharra at last stood paralyzed, as his terrifying princes of darkness were finally subdued. Their absolute dominion over those dry plains was permanently broken by the flawless geometry of celestial spells. Victorious deities quickly descended upon the fallen princes to bind their shifting forms with unbreakable tethers of pure light, and Enmesharra was stripped of his ancient weapons, firmly restrained by the shining assembly of the heavens. This captured family of titans stood completely helpless before their radiant conquerors, as an ultimate judgment of the sky began to unfold. It is here that esoteric interpretations of ancient lore reveal a fascinating detail regarding his original physical form. Because the innermost essence of this towering Lord of the May was not just a swirling vortex of hateful energy. It is said that he possessed an all-consuming cosmic radiance, spoken in ancient tongues as Zimu. This magnificent aura of pure splendor was the very source of the terrifying authority he used to reign across the early world. A blinding light pulsed from his heavy frame to cast long and imposing shadows across flat green valleys. His luminous presence commanded total submission and reverence from any wandering spirits. Yet this breathtaking glow would soon be stripped away by a rising new order. Victorious deities did not destroy this incredible light after conquering that old guard. They instead forcibly removed it to claim its immense power. Scribes suggest this stolen brilliance was permanently reassigned to the young sun god named Shamash, marking an absolute end to his reign. Such a humiliating defeat brought unparalleled desperation to that fallen terrestrial ruler. We are left to wonder if it was that very chilling betrayal by his descendants that ultimately sealed those final moments of the rebellion. For some, fragmented records hint that Enmesharra proceeded to sacrifice his 7 terrifying sons to buy his own eternal safety. He willingly surrendered his loyal offspring to the overwhelming anger belonging to those victorious younger gods, who executed his shadowy princes upon the sacred mountain peak in a fit of rage. To ensure his own survival against this unstoppable celestial justice, he had traded his most fearsome weapons for a quiet exile in the deepest shadows of the underworld. Known to ancient Sumerians as Kur, this was the land of no return, where all souls, no matter how powerful, would eventually find their rest. Yet an even more bitter conclusion awaited the 7 fierce demons who had fought so hard and so valiantly to defend him. Because their untamed essence proved far too deeply ingrained within creation to simply vanish into thin air. The victors would come to transform these defeated demons into brilliant weapons of the night sky, becoming the feared 7 Sabiti demons of Mesopotamian lore. They were permanently bound to a strict servitude under their new Anunnaki masters. These fierce spirits were placed carefully within the glittering constellation known as the Pleiades. They would remain there as an ultimate balancing force for our entire universe. Such profound celestial placement allowed them to take on more solidified forms in later traditions. Their once chaotic fury was channeled into a highly structured purpose and design within that starry vault, perfectly bridging a forgotten epoch with a vibrant new reality. Stripped entirely of the blinding splendor, that old primeval ruler faced the loss of his royal lineage, along with any remaining claims to those terrestrial planes above. His massive body was cast down into the absolute blackness of our deepest underground caverns. He was left to languish in a perpetual darkness far below our packed soil, strictly forbidden from ever reaching out to touch those warming rays of sunshine. Those brilliant solar beams now belonged exclusively to the radiant usurpers. He became a dormant ghost of a dark epoch that our vibrant universe preferred to forget. His towering primeval essence would eventually fade into an endless expanse of forgotten history, whispered of only in myth. But the fallen sovereign still held a deeply respected position even after his catastrophic fall. He essentially became an ultimate ancestor spirit of that ancient world, his massive resting form acting as the immense and silently sleeping roots of the great world mountain. Despite their rebellion, the Anunnaki did not lose all respect for their powerful primordial ancestors, because even in their triumph, they still offered him solemn funerary sacrifices to honor his foundational presence. They understood that his quiet submission provided the absolute bedrock for all subsequent layers of creation. The profound sacrifice transformed a swirling vortex of emptiness into a secure foundation built upon permanent stone. Our fragile existence rests comfortably upon such heavily fortified ancient pillars, holding up our conscious reality from below, with unwavering endurance. This magnificent terrestrial victory officially cleared a path for a much larger cosmic resolution. Those sacred blueprints known as the Holy May were finally secured by a new hierarchy. Our vast terrestrial front was now safe. When we step back and look closely at these lost legends that have been slowly recovered over time, we realize this wasn't just a physical battle won on the plains, but a total shift in how the universe functions. It represents the exact moment when raw, unmapped forces from the deep earth became the quiet pillars holding up our world. By securing those sacred clay blueprints, the younger gods didn't just win a war, they anchored reality itself. This part of the story carries such massive meaning because it shows us that true balance cannot exist without first honoring the foundational energies that came before. The clay tablets invite us to look at the very ground beneath our feet, not as mere stagnant dirt, but as a living entity of silent respect. Not the kind of respect which must be glaringly obvious. The kind that does not need to be spoken aloud, because it soaks every molecule of our very essence, locked forever within the very core of our origins. But the battle wasn't quite over yet. A lingering shadow still hovered dangerously close to our eastern horizon, where we shift our focus back once more toward those churning outer oceans. The final clash of the gods hovered closely over those churning waters, where Marduk drove his roaring chariot directly into a heavy fog of the primeval sea. His radiance cut perfectly through those thick layers of suffocating mist, like a brilliant sunrise melting away the heavy shadows of the night. Deafening thunder echoed continuously as those beasts of the sky stomped their hooves, carrying him rapidly across the darkening atmosphere. The sheer magnitude of his approach sent violent tremors rippling across the already disturbed surface of our ocean. Purifying light radiated outward from his armor, challenging those deepest shadows of antiquity where Tiamat's evil brood lurked within the swirling chaos. These venomous creations shifted their massive forms nervously as the blinding energy of the sun descended upon them. They had never witnessed such a breathtaking display of supreme authority. Standing proudly at the forefront of this monstrous legion was the prideful commander of the deep, Quingu. He waited for this young challenger with a bitter arrogance, fueling his immortal heart. That glowing ledger of earth remained strapped securely against his broad chest, knowing that the tablet of destinies granted him a supreme capability to reshape the very fabric of existence. Our entire cosmos held its breath as these two immense forces finally closed the remaining distance between them. The young hero did not falter as he approached those monstrous forces. Much the opposite, he directed his divine chariot straight towards that stolen symbol of universal governance. Rather than drawing a physical weapon, Marduk simply locked his penetrating gaze onto the general. This intense stare carried a flawless geometry belonging to an organized universe of structure, and as such it pierced directly through illusions of grandeur wrapping around him. The commander froze, paralyzed. He had been elevated to a position which far exceeded his resolve against such a powerful force. Some interpretations suggest that this moment reflected a sudden realization of his own inadequacy, an underlying truth that shattered his will. His mind simply could not process that pure logic radiating from his opponent. A paralyzing wave of sheer terror gripped his limbs, freezing him right in his place. The stolen matrix of reality pulsed weakly against his chest as his confidence drained away. The vast army of monsters behind him sensed this sudden shift in commanding presence. Every ounce of his stolen bravado evaporated into a cold sweat of absolute dread. This once proud prince of deep water found himself unable to lift a single weapon. He could not even utter a basic command of magic to direct his venomous army of beasts. A total collapse of his psychology left his devoted brood devoid of any leadership. They watched blindly as their supreme general surrendered to humiliating defeat. Marduk brought his thundering chariot to a halt directly beside the paralyzed Titan, reaching out to reclaim that heavy ledger of clay for the younger generation. With one effortless motion, he tore the glowing tablet of destinies away from his frozen opponent, instantly stripping their authority over our cosmos. Our victorious champion proudly pressed this heavy artifact against his own radiant armor. This was no mere symbolic act. It was one which fundamentally shifted the ultimate command over our entire universe. A beautiful resonance of harmony began to pulse softly from its hardened clay vessel to signify its rightful return. But his work was not yet done. Having witnessed her general be incapacitated, the enraged matriarch of our sea was forced to act. Tiamat surged forward from those darkest depths, ready to crush this young rebel herself. Her massive silhouette rose aggressively against the murky horizon of those eastern waters. This fierce goddess of dragons opened her cavernous jaws to swallow our radiant champion whole. Massive waves of salt crashed violently as she threw her colossal weight and raw destructive energy toward those shining heavens. Even so, this young god of storms remained unfazed by her terrifying magnitude. As those terrifying jaws closed around him, he quickly summoned a fierce weapon of our atmosphere. Clay records of antiquity refer to this raging force as the Imhul wind. He drove this violent tempest directly down her throat to block her massive bite. These rushing currents expanded violently within her belly to hold her jaws apart. Her sprawling body was paralyzed entirely by the invisible breath of our sky, where she was pinned helplessly against the stars. Marduk then drew his magnificent bow to release a single arrow of blinding fire. That brilliant shaft of light carried a purifying heat capable of cleansing our entire universe. This intense projectile of our sun tore rapidly through her, splitting her primordial heart and extinguishing the chaotic force of life that fueled her anger. That absolute sovereignty of our young creator was forever cemented in this single moment of devastation. Her colossal form fell motionless upon a dark floor of the ocean, bringing a swift end to her suffocating threat. A profound stillness washed over those churning waters to replace the deafening roar of battle. Her twisted creations watched in absolute disbelief as their seemingly invincible creator was finally slain. Their venomous courage dissolved as they tried to scatter into the deepest shadows of those murky depths. But Marduk would not allow them to escape. He swiftly cast an inescapable cosmic net to bind these 11 species of monsters tightly within heavy chains. These once terrifying phantoms found their destructive weapons trampled into the dark, muddy floor of their primeval battlefield. A great resolution descended over those churning saltwater tides as the roaring tempest finally broke. The deafening clamor of the cosmic war faded into a soft rhythmic lapping of gentle ocean waves. Marduk stood triumphantly over the colossal remnants of that slain sea matriarch, with his radiant golden armor gleaming brightly. He gazed down upon her massive aquatic silhouette against an ocean floor, to formulate a breathtaking act of celestial architecture. This young king recognized that her raw, chaotic matter could be carefully repurposed. He would use her sprawling form to construct an entirely new physical structure for our waking world. Scribes of the Enuma Elish recorded this monumental cosmic shift unfolding slowly across those quiet waters. With one massive strike, he split her boundless aquatic body entirely in 2 parts, like a dried fish. This brilliant storm god hoisted one massive half upward to form an impenetrable dome for our open skies. This heavily reinforced physical barrier was designed specifically to cage those chaotic upper energies of our primeval cosmos. A luminous ceiling prevented that dark surrounding void from ever again flooding down to drown our fragile universe below. He then gathered her remaining lower half to construct the heavy foundations of our terrestrial Earth. Every patch of solid soil beneath mortal feet now rests securely upon those bound silent remnants of a long-lost goddess. Her sacrifice became the vast stage upon which all future human history would eventually play out. Ancient clay tablets paint a highly poetic picture of her final magnificent transformation into our surrounding natural environment. It is said that her cold eyes were pierced to become eternal flowing sources of fresh water, feeding the great Tigris and Euphrates rivers with a gentle and nurturing suspension. Her last dying breath was permanently harnessed to become those atmospheric winds that endlessly circle the now carefully contained upper atmospheres of our globe, allowing a beautifully structured reality to finally bloom from its chaotic past. Towering mountains of jagged stone were shaped directly from her broken bones to anchor those shifting green valleys. While our early terrestrial plains took solid shape, a separate trial was preparing to unfold high above. Quingu was quickly brought to the grand luminous assembly hall to stand before the new divine council, bound tightly in heavy copper chains. This disgraced general faced an absolute uncompromising judgment from his radiant captors. It is here that our story takes on a new, profound twist, once which would usher the first breath of mortal life upon those sandy shores. It didn't take the gods long to discover that it was he who had been the primary spark which ignited Tiamat's rage. He was formally indicted for manipulating the primordial goddess into waging her catastrophic war against their peaceful celestial order. Those supreme creators of our universe delivered a swift celestial justice without any lingering hesitation. Just like the 7 demons before him, his arrogant prince of deep water was violently executed. His ancient veins spilled his dark, vital essence upon the bright, polished floors of that heavenly sanctuary. Those deep crimson pools contained the most raw essence of his being. It was a potent magic that carried a volatile spark of pure, unrestricted wilderness. Yet this fallen commander would not simply fade into an endless expanse of forgotten history. Enki stared thoughtfully into those dark pools. he recognized a profound opportunity resting quietly within the spilled blood of this titan, and possessed an esoteric capability to repurpose such untamed energy for a much higher cause. In this particular version of the law, the EGG did not rebel, but the high gods knew that this working classes of deities were already growing exhausted from their menial labor, and having been elevated to their new positions of ultimate power over the cosmos, they would need a new labor force to allow them to focus on preserving harmony and directing the now uncontested development of the earth. Sweeping agricultural canals demanded endless hours of back-breaking toil to keep sweet water flowing freely. Those younger EGG gods complained bitterly about their unending tasks of shaping soft river mud into towering temple platforms. A completely new species of mortal caretakers was desperately needed to relieve those immortal beings of their endless fatigue. They required a dedicated workforce, once which was capable of understanding the complex cosmic instructions from the distant starry vault. Enki planned to mix this rebellious titan blood with soft-yielding clay from his lower marshes in the southern seas. This potent mixture would provide the perfect vessel to harbor an incredible spark of divine intelligence. He would soon forge the very first human beings to act as obedient servants for a sprawling earthly garden. Their entire existence would be defined by their service to those exact same gods who had overthrown their own ancestors. It is a profoundly philosophical origin, one which forever links mankind to a dark and long since forgotten era of primordial titans, suggesting that still to this day we may carry the restless essence of that slain god within our very own pulsing veins. Perhaps we will never know for sure, but it is a concept which still echoes down throughout every age yet to come. Because, strangely, this ancient rebellious spark perfectly mirrors the inherent and extremely unpredictable friction that seems embedded so deeply within every mortal spirit. Those dark, winding rivers of our ancestral past will forever pulse with a quiet resonance of primeval defiance, but it would be balanced by this ultimate act of biological engineering that would officially close this dark chapter, to usher in a tranquil new epoch. That sweeping era slowly settled into an unbroken rhythm of absolute tranquility. Vast open skies returned beautifully to a state of perfect, unshakable equilibrium. A pristine celestial canopy blankets our resting earth to offer the eternal promise of security. The early caretakers of those fertile river valleys trusted entirely in this magnificent framework of antiquity. Their bodies rested securely upon massive foundations of protection formed directly from the slumbering primordial gods that remained quietly below, to keep our terrestrial plains safely insulated from the shifting winds just beyond the furthest parameters of our world. We breathe those exact same atmospheric currents that were tamed by the gods so long ago. Every gentle exhalation harmonizes flawlessly with the slow turning of distant planetary spheres. The magnificent driving force of creation continues to hum with a steady flow of reassuring resonance. Primeval deities rest comfortably in a permanent state of undisturbed slumber, just like the enormous roots of support belonging to the great tree of life. These forgotten titans effortlessly hold up the full weight of the earth. Their quiet submission ensures that its fragile surface remains perfectly at peace. Sprawling gardens of agriculture can bloom freely without anything to hold it back. This beautiful cosmic balance is found in the beating hearts of every living creature to walk about our lands, and the ancient essence of vitality woven into the first mortal beings now rests completely at harmony within our own hearts. That primeval spark finds intrinsic serenity inside our very souls, while our conscious minds drift along starlit folds of space, searching its mysterious depths for the lingering remnants of our hidden past. We are all a part of this grand journey through time and space, our quiet heartbeats pulsing in perfect time with the steady, gentle twinkling of distant planets. Wandering thoughts dissolve seamlessly into the cooling night air. A deeply restorative trance washes over the first generation of mortal beings, sleeping inside woven huts of reeds. Our entire physical realm surrenders willingly to the comforting embrace of midnight. High above those dreaming terrestrial plains sits a radiant assembly of watchful guardians, where the protective Anunnaki deities recline comfortably within their shimmering celestial shrines. A gentle silver light casts a pale glow of protection across quiet valleys of winding rivers. They keep a constant vigil over our beautiful earthly garden far below. Their benevolent oversight guarantees that a perfectly balanced system will never falter. Sweet currents of the Euphrates River flow smoothly under this flawless order. Luminous constellations trace predictable pathways to map the eternal canopy. Every twinkling sphere serves as a silent guardian for the resting population. A profound sensation of warmth radiates downward to soothe tired muscles. As heavy shadows stretch lazily across the silent delta, we feel the physical boundaries of that ancient metropolis slowly melting away. Towering walls of mud brick dissolve gently into a soundless ether, where we surrender completely to an overwhelming harmony of turning heavens. Day fades beautifully into night, reflecting the dark depths of the vast cosmic ocean. Smooth currents of deep time carry our floating spirits far beyond familiar landscapes. We drift peacefully into a comforting embrace of celestial seas twinkling overhead. A mesmerizing lullaby echoes softly from those distant planetary spheres, wrapping us in an unshakable blanket of pure starlight. This quiet universe breathes in perfect synchronization with our own. Gentle breezes carry a sweet scent of blooming date palms through empty city squares. This fragrant perfume mingles flawlessly with a rich aroma of damp river silt and creates an intoxicating atmosphere that lulls every living creature into a deeply restorative trance. Smooth stone pathways release their stored warmth from a long day of bright sunshine, perfectly blending into the cool descending chill of twilight. Listen closely to the softly lapping tides of gentle waters against muddy banks. It provides a steady example of predictable motion that mirrors the slow rotation of our galaxy. Ancient waterways whisper soothing assurances, settling into an enduring state of peace. Let your awareness sink even deeper into this welcoming expanse of infinite space. Every single molecule of your being aligns beautifully with the soothing hum of antiquity. A gentle cosmic wind cradles you safely within its flawless operations through time. Everything is held securely within a compassionate architecture designed long ago. Golden dawns will inevitably rise, exactly as intended by the very gods who first brought forth light to our primeval world.